false news has become all too common. More alarming, some media outlets publish
Yo, what's up?
What's good? What's good? We're back.
We're back, dude. How you doing?
Doing well, man. It's been a busy season for both of us this spring. A lot of work to be done. A lot of moving around,
Yeah.
traveling. I know
Yeah.
I went to like L.A. and Houston. I know you went to Tulsa. And
Spring's always busy. I've been all over Bentonville, Dallas, Tulsa. Yeah, it's a lot of regional travel for sure. That's just how the spring is, man. You go, you know.
yeah, everybody's getting their budgets figured out and figuring out what work they want to do, and then it's
Mhm.
go time, and then the rest of the year is working around that.
That's
So,
right. We've been too busy really with actual work to do the hobby job, which is this, right? So,
and not to say, that there hasn't been anything eventful happening. There's been a lot of changes and developments in the tech world, obviously being shaped in America by the political landscape. We're starting to see a lot of stuff coming out in regards to AI, and I know we've looked over micronuclear plants and the data
yeah.
centers, and what is being scaled up with all these big corporations to be this new digital
Mm-hmm.
network that's going to be able to connect a lot of things, and
Yeah.
smart cities and all that jazz.
Well, I think a lot of this little hiatus we've been on is let the dust settle a little bit, see where the chips fall between, the change of administration, a lot of the new, things that have been happening in the world, like you talk about in technology. We had several big announcements last year towards the end of the year, and even beginning of this year with the administration change, and the cohort of some big tech companies that are kind of locking up together to work on AI and data centers and things like that. So I think the last couple of months has been a matter of seeing sort of taking a reassessment of where everything's at, looking at the scenarios, right? So I think we're coming back at the right time to talk about some new, very important topics and some breaking topics, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely. I feel like it's been good to get past the election because a lot of the focus gets all wrapped up in politics, but now like things are starting to happen, and corporations are making moves. People are announcing what new technologies they're working
Yeah.
on. Which is what our topics are today. My main focus is on this Internet of Bodies that we've been kind of discussing and seeing passively, and then your topic was I don't want to say it wrong.
The world's first biocomputing platform.
There you go. There you go. And so there are two topics and technologies that are very related. At the same time, they have nuanced differences, but I think they're important technologies that people should be aware of,
Yeah.
both for technological advancement, but also the social impacts. And so I know that's kind of been our focus on this podcast. I feel like it's trying to talk about topics that people may or may not know are evolving in the middle of everything else that's going on in our lives.
Yeah.
And it's easy to miss them or not hear about them until they're in your face, right? Like ChatGPT and AI, people in our circles were talking about that stuff 2016, 2017, 2018,
Yeah.
and then boom, you say, what is an AI? I don't even know what that means. 2021, 2022, people are using it to pass college classes. So, this stuff comes on quickly. And the people who develop it, when they give you their timeline, I mean, a lot of this stuff by 2027, 2028, we're going to see it start hitting the big cities, right? Where it's put more into practice.
Well, I think, you kind of hit on at the beginning how the shift away from politics, which we were never really that deeply into it. It was always from the point of view of really technology. And that really, the reason being that technology drives change, not only social change, but political change. Always has. I mean, you look back through human history, it's always the advent of something that's either being used as a weapon of war or being used as a weapon of peace or, being used as a surveillance asset or whatever the case may be. You look all through the Industrial Revolution, how that rapidly changed culture and political landscapes, and then up through the space race, right? The World War II push, the space race after that, the Cold War, the missile, all that. Now we're into really the next stage of all of that, which is global technology war. And how are these technological advancements going to change political outlooks and world kind of conflicts and things like that? And specifically with the two things we're talking about here, how will the advancement of the human element into technology change the world across every sector? So I think we're perfectly back on topic.
Right. And a lot of in the futuristic talk, you hear things about the transhuman ideology or pathway to the future, where humans merge with machine. And it's up until now, it's been very unclear how that could manifest in a realistic way. We've seen it in a sci-fi way. We've seen it in movies. But I think we're starting to see a pathway of how it would evolve. And, what's called the Internet of Things, we're all familiar with, where it's the internet of the digital web. We browse it, we shop, we take classes, we learn things.
Yeah, and you're talking about infrastructure, right? The Internet of Things, bridges, technology, lights, infrastructure,
Shopping.
how it's all interconnected now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then, all these businesses, as a result of the internet powering all of these transactions and interactions, the businesses that partner together and form chains and pipelines of industry, right? It shapes everything. And so everybody on that side of things is then fueling all the research to make the digital world mirror the real world.
Yeah.
Right. It started with things like tracking and unique identities. Plants these days get injected with a little nano identity, right? So that from the field to the supermarket, that's all tracked and traced and scanned and whatever. And so the new technologies that we're seeing evolve are doing that to our bodies. And that's why it's called the Internet of Bodies, is how do you take the human biological system and collective, and then you have some type of interface or technology that then builds a network or an operating system. And so the Internet of Bodies kind of starts with 3 phases, right? So without knowing it, we've already been in phase 1. That's things like Fitbits,
Wearable tech.
Yeah.
That's what they're calling the external devices, right?
Right, or like a pacemaker. Well, it could be internal. Wait,
there's the 3 generations I read: external devices, right? Watches, Fitbit, stuff like that. Internal devices, pacemaker, more medical, and then your third is merged, which is the Neuralink. The body merged, the cyborg stuff. Those are kind of the 3 generations of that.
Or the nanotech, in which it's floating around your body.
That's right.
And for the first stage, as we've all been enjoying, I don't currently have a Fitbit, and I've turned off all my biometric tracking.
You have an
on
Apple
my
Watch?
phone. I don't.
Yeah.
Nope.
See, I have one, but I hardly ever use it. I use it when I'm hiking. That's about it. I mean, some people wear them all the time. Like that's
right. It can monitor your sleep. There's a lot of valuable data that these, the telemedicine and these devices have been able to do. Right. You can, if you know your sheet, your graphs, your body weight and how you sleep and what you eat, and that all data is very valuable to people who.
Oh yeah, especially if you haven't opted out of the privacy aspect. They're collecting all that data for medical purposes, and obviously, I think Apple has always been a really good company on the side of the consumer when it comes to privacy. But once the data is out there, how can they use it to better your lives or really realize market trends? It could be used for a lot of things, right? Like the average heart rate in Olathe, Kansas, right?
Right.
Like what's the diabetic likelihood of people in Duluth? So there's different ways that data can be used.
Right, and it can be used at the in healthcare with your doctor, right? So that your doctor has the most accurate readout. It could be used in your own lifestyle, tracking changes, implementing changes, and then also at the societal level, right? Which is, we have a whole Department of Health, right, that wants to understand, the health of the American people, wants to help decision making. So there's a very good reason why at the governmental level they would be interested in this tech, because again, aside from all its other benefits, the health data itself is very important. And so you also come with the risk, right? And so you're putting something in your body. If we get to phase 2 and 3, which is ultimately what will take us to the future of this human-robot
2's already here for the most part.
Right, and those are less...
The nanobots aren't quite to the level they're going to be. But
Exactly. Yeah. And, things like, insulin modulators, right, for people with diabetes.
They don't have to do their shots anymore.
Right.
Right.
And, I could totally see things like video games or digital experiences, if you start getting into controlling other hormones such as excitement, dopamine, then just by having a connection to this thing and playing a video game and it knows your heart rate, then this experience can be so physical.
Yeah.
Not only are you playing and controlling something, you're feeling something that the game is.
Gets into Total Recall stuff where you go into the
Right.
brain setting and live at a totally different
Yeah, so it's pretty wild. And then from the side of you know, from the side of tracking your health, when we get to these things that are infused inside you, such as a brain implant or nanobots, these are similar to your phone, right? So these would have their own unique, whether it's a Bluetooth identity or like a Wi-Fi identity, it would be broadcasting a signal or a wavelength everywhere you go. And so as you pass other people who are collecting this geospatial data, you know, it know just like, so during COVID, there was this app that they created to, if you signed up for it, it would track your movements.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Right,
Yeah.
and it would interact with other people's devices so that they can build a map of who you've interacted with,
Social
if someone gets
distance,
sick,
yeah,
right?
track who may have gone through and things like that.
Right, and
yeah.
they presented it as an incentive-based thing where you're not only doing the good social thing, but we'll give you points and rewards for keeping good behavior, and then if you come
Yeah, your universal basic income check will increase if you adhere to our guidelines.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, if you come into contact with someone sick, it'll notify you. That's at least a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about here is a much broader capture of what people do in their lives, where they go, who they interact with, and it's all done in an automated format,
Mm-hmm.
and then all this mass data is then parsed through with AI, right?
The interesting thing about it, at least at this stage in where we're at, this is all opt-in stuff. Like,
Right.
you're not being foisted upon you that you have to have, Neuralink, or other, internal tech, right? It's all by choice, at least at this point in the timeline. So it's interesting to see the way it's being used in different outcomes, different forms, and also curiosities as to where it will continue to evolve towards. Obviously, the Neuralink will become, more commonplace, I think, across, genetic makeups and probably social strata, right? It's not, there'll be a day when it's not just for the rich. It's like when they, the car first, became a consumer product, only the super rich could have one. Now everybody has a car, right? So pretty much. Or you can have, right? So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see as this technology progresses along with time that passes, how the cost of the production will come down eventually to the point where more people have access to the option, right?
Right.
They can at least decide if they want something like that or not. It's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we already do a lot of this biometric tracking, and implant stuff in livestock. This happens a lot with the cattle industry.
Sure.
I did not grow up a farmer. I grew up around farms, and so you can kind of see if you're, I don't want to say social engineer because that gets better. If you're like a public risk management, or you're trying to figure out how do you manage a whole population of people, then you almost think of a huge population as livestock. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about herd immunity when it comes to the medical stuff. So they're already thinking of us as like a herd that has to be managed. And so it's almost not, it's not beyond the ordinary that they would think, oh, this is kind of like
you think
livestock.
about that livestock you're talking about. A lot of that's to track disease and make sure that if one of them has it, it doesn't spread to the herd and compromise the entire crop, right? So
Right.
when you apply the same thinking to the human element, how could that also be, used in that way, to make sure that, okay, everybody's copacetically living. This person's got the evolved fungus zombie that we don't want to spread to everybody else. So that person needs to be quarantined or whatever the case is. Your brain goes interesting places with where these things could be used at the end of the day. But I think the most important thing right now is that they continue to develop. I'm not one that says, oh, we gotta have this stuff, I think that we do have to progress in that way for good outcomes. The trick there is balancing, much like the conversation with AI right now, that sort of struggle philosophically between the different DeepSeek and OpenAI and Grok, and sort of, okay, how are we using this, and who's deciding how it computates information, and what its points of view are. And some of them say, no, we got to keep it in the box. The other ones are saying, no, we got to. So I don't know if anybody really has the answer. The most important thing, though, is that the conversation's being had.
Right.
So at least that discourse is occurring, and that discourse is finally getting to policymakers, right? It takes a long time for the policymakers to catch up to the technology that's surpassed them. The technology races ahead, and almost once it's out of the box, then they're like, oh crap, we need to. You think about what happened with like Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. The congressional hearings happened years after that. Once the thing
the data had been grabbed.
yeah, once the thing occurs, then it's like, oh shit, we got to figure this out, right? So they move slowly and they're behind the curve. And I think the more you see technological CEO and thinking influence get into that sort of talk actively with the policymakers, then you start to see at least the discourse occurring, the thinking starting to happen, and then from there you have to say, well, okay, as long as this isn't used in some fascist Ayn Rand future, right? Then okay. So that's sort of the question.
You're, when you get to the level of the tier 3, right, which is implants and things that interact with your body or record your data, you always run the risk of hackers. You know, I think it was Dick Cheney in like 2008 or 2009. There was a thing that came out.
Oh, he had to turn off
his Facebook because he didn't want to get hacked,
right.
and it was him being
involved
in the government. It would have posed a threat to our nation, right?
Sure.
If he goes
Isn't that
down.
wild that a hacker, they could have killed him, like
right? And
speed it
so
up.
even if the government per se doesn't, I mean, criminals aren't gonna, or again, corporations who don't really have an ethic spine, they're going to take that data the way TikTok takes your data, where it's like you agreed to this one application that then gets all of your data that's in your device and what you do and where you go. With the internet in the past, it's relied on our interaction with it, right? So like Facebook, if you're thinking of Facebook as like a good, network and grid, control grid is the term I keep hearing. It requires users uploading their information. It's voluntary. They get to select what they want to tell this aggregate data. But when it is biometric implants, then everything you do and everywhere you go, that's tracked. And then that data is then used to interact with you, right? So if you frequent this place or this type of activity, then the people who set up the social engineer, whatever, the people who nudge us into certain actions or market to us, they have involuntary data that they're given. And so then you don't know when you're interacting with someone or you go to the grocery store, if you're being influenced in a way because they're using your biometric data.
What's interesting though, to me, I mean, this is a fair part of the conversation, what we're talking about right now, but it's almost the remedial infancy version of it, right? Because we're talking about just the basics of everyday life, not the full out Frankenstein, you can live forever now version, which that's where it's all going, right? To where eventually that's what this merged, internet connected body would be, is that, yeah, you're good. You're consciously infinite now. And then it becomes more of a moral and ethical question beyond just day-to-day life monitoring and interconnectedness, right? So there's kind of another phase to this conversation, which I think is where we get into more of the computer, the Cortical Lab, CL1, which we'll talk about here in a second. But this is where these two conversations kind of converge, and it gets into that consciousness convergence, which is sort of that singularity, bigger conversation. So there's the one we have in now, which is about who controls this and who decides and where does the data go. And then ultimately, is there a hive mind at the end of all of this? I don't know.
Right.
I
think of it, my final comments on it is like, think of places like China where they're already implementing, let's say, a social credit score. They rely on cameras. They rely on your phone. They rely on data that you can get around. If you wanted to try to avoid it, wear a shirt or a mask that,
put your tinfoil hat on.
Yeah, right. It shines and deflects the stuff in your camera so it can't identify you. There's things you can do, or you can get a device with, certain protections. But with this type of thing, I mean, there's been court cases in the past couple of years where they were able to get their Apple Health data or their other type of health tracking data, use that in court. Okay. That's in an actual murder case, right? Where you got the bad guy. But what about the instances when we get to social credit and social control where based on your heartbeat, based on where you were, they can tell, and again, if you're tracking chemical makeup, you put this drug in your system or you were doing this over here, that's punishable to the social, because it hurts the social fabric, right? So then it
becomes forensic, right?
Right. And then again, your social credit, your credit score impacts your ability to get a job, or what opportunities that the algorithm predicts is good for you, or you're not worthy of,
Yeah.
or you can't handle because you've done heroin once, so there's something wrong with your dopamine system. So, again, we get to a point where our lives could get on a set of rails and we aren't even aware that there's bumpers there keeping us this way. And this type of technology allows that now more than ever. Not
Yeah,
just
and there's
for
also some questions about how much of this is already there, and this is a little bit more conspiratorial maybe, but you've seen some stories out there of people saying that, there has been studies with people who have a high level of COVID vaccine in their system that they do emit a Bluetooth signal. Have you seen this?
yes.
I mean,
Okay. I didn't
Is
want to
there
go. I want to
truth
be
in
careful
that?
going there because it's hard, especially related to COVID and vaccines. It's hard to find verifiable data.
right.
But I have seen videos of like nurses saying, "Hey," and some of it wasn't even COVID; it was just vaccines in general.
Mm-hmm.
They have these readers where you put it up to this arm, no scan. You put it up to this arm where the nurse gets, she's like, put it on the spot where I got my shot. They emitted a code, like a 12-digit code. Um,
Bizarre.
and what's his face? Oh, he's a guy who's, is it Ike? David Ike? Is that his name?
Maybe, yeah, that sounds familiar.
He talked about someone that, they did a test where they took some people out in the middle of nowhere where there's no signal, right? They did tests with instruments.
Mm-hmm.
No signal from any towers or devices. They had the test subjects come free of devices. And when they started them at like 100 yards and then walked them closer and closer to this sensor.
Yeah.
And as they got close, they started projecting a Bluetooth
Isn't
signal.
that bizarre?
Now, your phone doesn't pick up that. Your
Yeah.
phone, everything.
We're talking like a super low level kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's an ID. And so, but your device has to be able to read that ID in order for you to connect with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like phones and iPads, because your ID is not programmed to be read by it, it's not going to pop up and say, I can connect to my body, right? But it's still a one-way code.
Eventually you could, though. That's kind of where we're going with that. Like there will be a day when, yes, I want a Bluetooth connect my body to check my like dopamine levels or whatever, like.
Right. And so there was a lot of craze regarding like vaccines and stuff. And, we know that Bill Gates and Fauci would love to put vaccines into vegetables and things like this. So you never know along the way where you picked up a little nanobot or a little just tracker that got injected into you, right?
Yeah.
And so then that's the segue. That's the first step through the door. Funny enough, the information I had heard the other day was that when Trump was doing Operation Warp Speed, getting ready for COVID to fire up the vaccine, the person he brought in to run the program was a gentleman who his specialization was in this type of tech, biotech, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy he brought in to run this.
I mean, that's where we're at. You got to get these people in there. I mean, so we're talking about the Internet of Bodies, right? We're talking about the 3 different generations of this stuff. You have the wearable tech, then you have the tech inside you, which is the pacemaker.
If we get to the point where a replacement hand,
and then we're talking about merged, which is Neuralink or this other stuff. Now, we're talking about things going into the body biologically. And then the next phase of this conversation is that we're going to take biological elements and put them into the computer, which is the CL1, right? So I think, Cortical Labs, that's the name of this Australian startup. They've released what's called the world's first code deployable biological computer, and it's the CL1. Debuted in March. It's going to start selling this summer for $35,000. The idea here is that it's the world's first deployable biological computer with what they're calling a BIOS, B-I-O-S, which Apple may have a problem with that, but the Biological Intelligence Operating System.
The BIOS.
It's a mixture of hard silicone and soft tissue. So they're actually taking neurons, live neurons from donors, and those are a part of the computer. They live up to 6 months, at which point you'll have to reinvest or refurbish, right, to get new neurons. But the whole idea here is that the neurons are being used for the computational power of the computer. Pretty amazing stuff. We're talking about, human brains have neurons obviously connected together in hierarchies. And basically from that, we're talking about this emerging intelligence and maybe even at some point consciousness, right, being used in this computational form. Pretty amazing. It's essentially fusing human brain cells on a silicon chip to process the information via sub-millisecond electrical feedback loops. This is the kind of stuff that we're saying could vie against an artificial supercomputer. You know, when you think about it, way out there, far out ideas that down the road we have the supercomputer of AI that's computational, right? And then we have the supercomputer of the human brain, which is powered by neuron. The thing about these computers and anything neuron like powered, it requires minuscule amount of power to run compared to the AI, which that's a big issue for AI and all this computational power that's needed is where are we going to get all this electricity? These things don't need it. They're basically saying, they're saying our base level with the neurons, we're already there. We're already at our base level is much higher than the base level of these data center AIs driven computational models. So super interesting. To get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts before we talk more philosophical on it, each one of these units, which is about the size of a cinder block. It's a little smaller than a cinder block. Very cool, slick looking. We'll put a picture up. They basically contain 800,000 lab-grown human neurons. They've been reprogrammed from the skin or blood samples of real adult donors. The cells remain viable for up to 6 months, fed by a life support system that supplies nutrients, controls temperature, filters waste, and maintains the balance of the environment. Meanwhile, the neurons are firing and interpreting signals, adapting from each interaction. Something super interesting about this to me is in the early stage testing of this, they started with the Pong game, which is exactly where video game companies started. You know, that Pong is kind of the beginning of video games, and it's the beginning of the CL1. They said within minutes of turning this thing on, it knew how to play Pong. Like it
Yikes.
it didn't take, I mean, it took a few minutes. It was like, oh yeah, it knows how to play Pong now. So, you know, obviously the use of human neurons in computing raises questions about the future of AI development, biological computers like the CL1, you know, provide some advantages over conventional AI models, particularly in terms of learning efficiency and energy consumption. So I don't know. What do you think about this? It's, to me, I want one. They will not sell it right now to anyone that is not suitable to have it. Like it's really only meant for research purposes right now in laboratory environments. Like if you're a guy in your garage, they're not going to sell it to you. You have to have a proven kind of, you know, suitable setting to have one.
Yeah. So the
many philosophical questions.
Right. I want to try to start with some technical questions. Right. So essentially, what we're looking at is some form of a platform chip, right? Almost like a server, right? It's going to be like a server farm or whatever, where you've got a bunch of these on some type of rack, I'm assuming, and then what type of interface? I mean, can you hook a computer up to this rack?
You can.
And then say, hey, I want to program this problem set. And then it's going to run the computations.
100%. It's just a computer. It's just like any other computer. You know, it has like the computer has USBs. It has an HDMI out. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about input output. That's all a computer is, right? I'm gonna tell it to do something. It's gonna do something and show it back to me. So we're basically just saying it's a computer that uses human neurons as the processor instead of the Apple M4 chip. Or, you know, the Intel, whatever. Like that's the processor is now the human neuron. So interesting to this point, you know, they're saying that producing and maintaining neuron-based systems is significantly more complex than manufacturing traditional processors. Ensuring long-term stability poses challenges, right? Ethical concerns is kind of where we're going, which is like, if you're using human-derived brain cells in the technology, where are they coming from? Now, the ones that CL1 is using are lab grown and lack consciousness. So that's kind of where we're at. It's
the type of tissue that you can stimulate, essentially. Yeah. It's kind of give you how to, you manufactured, you took like some stem cells and the issue is that the stem cell needs the DNA prompt to evolve into the cell. So I feel like somebody, you know, people who subject themselves or their bodies and their DNA to medical testing, they're like the baseline usually for all these different technologies, like vaccine technology. There's one lady in specific, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she's like the famous sample that helped iterate a bunch of cancer medicines and vaccine stuff. And so somebody's DNA has to, even if they've stripped it of some individual genetic code, still has to be the blueprint to tell it what to do. And so that's why, same with cloning, right? You're just taking an embryo. We talked about cloning. You're taking an embryo, you're removing the nucleus with DNA, and you're putting the DNA of something else in there, which then takes over and tells it what to do. But the reality is, it still is carrying on the genetic outline of the original embryo, right? And so that's where it's like, I feel like you said, there's an ethical concern for,
well, this level is
whose
so much
mind is
more.
going in this.
This level though is so much more atomic than and microscopic than what you're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about neurons. I mean, this is like tiny little bits, right? Like
Right.
that they're just growing in the lab. You know, the interesting thing about it from the human cognition point of view is although these are lab grown and lack consciousness, the advancements in the field as this continues, we're gonna cross some ethical boundaries, you know,
Right.
and it's gonna prompt discussions about boundaries of AI and human like cognition.
Right.
And sort of how far do we go with these machines until they do reach consciousness? If we're talking about a living computer, you know, this is the first version. This is beta 1, basically, you know.
Yeah. So,
Although, well, just briefly, I'll say there was one before this. The original prototype was called Dish Brain. This is the one that that taught itself how to play Pong. Check this out. The Dish Brain prototype trained cell cultures to play the classic arcade game Pong in a simulated environment. They learned to track the ball and control a paddle, demonstrating goal-oriented behavior in vitro. So we're just talking about like just a little speck of human, right? It learned within minutes of gameplay. The neurons self-organized and adapted to sensory feedback. So
sensory.
And they found that these biological networks often outperformed deep reinforcement learning algorithms in sample efficiency and learning improvement. So the in vitro version of this was already surpassing OpenAI, and that's where they're saying like our base model is the human brain. All these deep learning things are trying to get to the brain.
Right.
We're starting at the brain. So that's how much smarter this thing potentially could be, right? That's
where I'm amazed, and I've always kind of stuck to this root philosophy. People say, you know, computers are going to be smarter than humans. I think the human brain truly is a miracle in the biological world, in that it has the computing power way beyond most computers. Now, when you stack its ability to compute and handle processes at a certain magnitude, yes, computers can excel. But usually it took a human mind to even be able to program and get there. So it's only as complex as the human brain is complex enough to build something. And, you know, we've seen, you know, look at the big quantum computing installations.
Yeah.
People don't realize, like, you're not going to have a quantum computer in your home. A quantum computer is a whole facility that requires gigawatts to turn on for a few minutes to get, you know, calculations that take a million years.
That's why they think this is the future, because it doesn't require all that.
And you just think about a brain tissue, like the efficiency of just some human tissue, brain tissue. To me, that's just a miracle, in that it can do high-level computation, the ability to experience and interface reality with the physical reality, having experience, without generating the same level of heat, without requiring the same level of energy input. Now, where I think it gets complex is this kind of like the ship of Magellan. Is it Magellan's ship, or is it?
Maybe
it's Magellan's ship. I think it is the one who circumnavigated the globe, right?
Yeah, I think it was.
And it might be someone else's ship. But the idea is, when you slowly replace each board in a ship as it goes, and when it leaves port, travels the world, and comes back, is it the same ship, right? And the same thing with consciousness. There's kind of like there's two views on, well, there's way more than two, but the two mainstream views are, there's like a collective growth into consciousness, or there's a projection of consciousness. Which is it? Consciousness first, or consciousness is a result or a consequence. And that's where I think some of this is going to get spooky, is if you're just starting with the brain tissue, right? That's maybe not conscious. You don't take a piece of brain tissue out of someone's brain,
Yeah.
put it on the table, and then it's them. It's not going to get up or grow another version of you.
Yeah.
But these things aren't going to be done isolated.
No.
So one piece of brain tissue is going to be on a server rack with 20 other pieces of brain tissue in a server warehouse with 1,000 pieces of brain tissue.
So the cloud component is already an aspect. They've got this, they've got this computer, the CL1 for 35,000, but there's also this whole other like server aspect to exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
And,
Go, sorry, go.
Well, I was going to say, to hit on your point of where's it all going, just so you know, the Cortical Labs long-term goal, this is like a direct quote, to unlock human-level intelligence with brain cells, bioengineered intelligence being a step beyond the brain in a dish models, aiming to design neuron cultures to perform functions that may eventually transcend conventional human capabilities. So that's where we're going, right? It's the super human computer. I mean,
it's the way of the future, it seems like.
Yeah, of infinite life and capability. I mean, that's kind of, being that any sufficiently advanced machine becomes indistinguishable from biology because they'll be adaptive, self-regenerating, low energy, sustainable, all the things that biology does on its own, these things would do, right? Mm-hmm. And if they do integrate it eventually with like the most advanced AI, you can only imagine the brilliance of evolution that would occur at that level. Like it probably would just live forever and recreate its own neurons and never have to be touched again, right? It would just be like, oh, we turned it on, that was it. I mean,
right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's that view of like, well, how many brain cell tissues does it take to collectively is it possible to collectively rebuild a neural network that can host consciousness? And what point, how many of these in a server warehouse do you have a brain, a collective network that's just like mine and your brain works, where it sees itself as its own self? Not only that, because it's flesh, it has an interface into physical reality to feel, to have physical needs, right, to eat, to whatever, and to be consciously aware of that through all that computational power. It seems almost like, when Facebook did that experiment where they had these two AIs and they turned them on and they started talking, within 30 seconds, they had the communication was so fast, they devised their own language. We didn't even know how much they communicated to each other or what they communicated. That's where it's like, is that same type of control going to be there with these brain cells where you're going to do the processing, but I'm not going to allow you to communicate this part of the brain tissue.
Like it needs to be in a black box.
Right. Doesn't need to communicate with the one next to it, but there'll be a control interface that'll handle the synthesis.
We can't plug you up to the internet, right?
Right, exactly. And, that's, if your theory is, and my theory about consciousness is more of our physical body is receiving our conscious broadcast. So if that's the case, again, is this brain cell, at what point this brain cell, or how many brain cells does it take to receive?
When does it
capable
reach
of catching that broadcast?
Yeah, catching that consciousness.
And so that's where it's like a little alarming to me, where, are you enslaving the human soul or a human-like soul or some type of other intelligence and that's unethical.
Once it does become conscious, is it then trapped in this hell where it's like, oh my God, I can't get out of this, hell that I'm in, kind of thing. And I would think that if it did,
that's an enemy. If you ask me, that's someone who it's like if that is the case, there's an ethical enslavement that's happening.
Sure.
And that being or thing,
even though it's lab grown,
right, is going to be capable of understanding its own position and might not like that. Right. So that's the same thing with AI, but here we're actually giving it. Yeah. We're giving it maybe not feeling's the right word, but we're giving it a stake in physical reality.
I was going to say, so on their website, there's several research papers that you can go read. There's probably a half dozen right now, and they're all on different topics. I definitely recommend you go check them out. One of the really interesting things about this is that sort of consciousness component. At what point do these things maybe reach that consciousness level, even though they're lab grown? Interesting language they use in some of their talking is that they've created a simulation environment for the neurons to excel in. And you're sort of like, interesting choice of words. You're basically
simulated reality.
Yes, you're creating a reality for these neurons to live in so that they can thrive in their computational power. And right, so they're not to the point of conscious life, but that's not to say that they might not. And it also makes you think about this simulation theory that we've talked about before, which is like, well, if they're doing this with neurons now, what prevents a greater power from doing that with human beings now, right? So it's like,
that's where, if simulation theory is true, it's almost necessary to already believe that we're one of those brain cells on a
sure,
server deck.
yeah,
That my own individual, just like the Matrix, right? We're all plugged into this experience, this simulated environment.
yeah,
But your brain tissue, the real you, is on a petri dish
yeah.
inside of an installation.
So in other
of some
words,
kind.
they're saying that these neurons think that they're in a brain. That's kind of the simulation that they've created, and that's and this is version 1. So you think about like the 386 computer that you had in the 90s, or that I had in the 90s, that could barely run a game,
right,
versus the M4 chip now that Apple has, the huge technological gap. So just imagine by the time they get to the M4 version of the CL1, I mean, holy crap, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be like not even understandable in terms of its capabilities. And I do think, though, although it raises all these ethical concerns amongst philosophical concerns and others, right? It is going to make, this level of evolution possible. Whereas I think AI, I think we may hit hit a roof on AI because of the power required to do it. Like, and there's already models that show that. Like, basically, the trajectory that AI is on, we do not have the energy to keep up with it. And by like 2035, lights out kind of thing. Like, sorry,
Right.
we can't go any further with this until we build like 100 nuclear plants kind of thing. Whereas this, you don't need that. You don't need any of that. So this technology may far surpass AI. And I think
it would merge.
it is. I think there is going to be some merging. And right now, this is a private company receiving its own VC, but dude, it's IPO. I'm putting all my money on this one. You know what I'm saying? Like, or a lot of it.
Is there already a stock option?
No, not yet. It's a private company right now, but I'm saying, when that IPO hits, it's going to be a high one, but you could already see how this could be the most valuable company on earth.
It's time to start looking out for the companies who are investing in this. Kind of like the research we've been doing, it's kind of led me to think like, hey, probably a good thing to invest in is micronuclear, right?
Yeah.
Like what NVIDIA is doing. If you like NVIDIA and you invest in NVIDIA, well, NVIDIA is investing all their money in micronuclear sites, okay? So if you want to follow that money, as many people have, do that.
Yeah.
Same thing with like Tesla, and whether it's XAI or these other ones, they're heading towards AI. Obviously, this is new on the scene. So look out for the companies that are going to head this direction.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, again, if, God forbid, nothing happens to the stock market and the economy pushes on and things are, bright in the future, well then, hey, that might not be a bad payoff. Because again, these are revolutionary techs that I think could carry us into the future. At least the future that the people who have the most money and all the assets would like to take us, that they're saying they'd like to take us.
Yeah. So, I mean, to that point, this is breaking news here that we're even talking about this. Like, there's a few articles out there about it on tech sites, but the first big finance article about this company is from yesterday. It's a Forbes article. So, this is like hot off the presses kind of thing. Once Forbes starts writing about you, we're onto something, right? And in here, they talk a little bit about the early financing, and, it doesn't go into necessarily who the players are, but it tells you a little bit about the company, based in Australia, founded by a man who I think is Chinese or Japanese. His name is, let me find it here. Han Weng Chong. I think that's Chinese, right? Founder and CEO. So, he's on it, and this could be your next Jensen, right? Or even past that. So, I'm not sure who the investors are, but you can only imagine,
Walt Disney,
who that seed money's coming from.
I joke. That is the thing. If this works, and they're going to be able to test this hypothesis of like, if you can successfully plug a computer up to the brain,
yeah,
then you can get to the point where your brain's in a vat and you got a robot body, and that these people who are aging and dying because their bodies give out while their mind is still good, well, then you've created that avenue where we slowly start replacing the biological husk that we're in.
That's right.
We keep the brain,
Yeah.
but the brain just needs to be nourished, and the automated body just needs energy,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, that's where all these millionaires and people who would love to live 200-300 years or forever, right, want to put their consciousness in a computer. To me, this prevents that scary idea of I kill my body entirely and then I put a digital input of me in a computer.
That's
No,
right.
no. We keep your brain alive. We regenerate it with stem cells.
Yeah. And you live in a mech
and you
armor.
live in a mech suit.
Yeah, exactly.
And now that, as we're growing, as we're able to grow human tissue that can interface with computers, you could live in a body that looks just like the one you have
100%.
and feels like the
Yeah.
one you have because the sensors.
Yeah.
I mean, same thing with video games. If you played VR, if you spend long enough playing VR, you get these phantom sensations. Your brain adjusts itself to the simulated space in terms of your perception and balance, and so
it's beyond the sci-fi, examples we've seen of advanced cyborgs. It's beyond that. It's not your David or your Ash from Alien. It's not your Blade Runner replicants. It's actually a human brain in a mech armor. The closest thing would be like RoboCop, right? Like that sort of idea, with
Terminator.
the exception that
Terminator,
with the exception that RoboCop was, he was controlled, but that's essentially
that's the scary.
That's the thing. Yeah, would you know? The interesting thing about this, it is all on the edge of creepy, and they talk about that a little bit in this Forge article. But as of now, CL1's general focus is really medical fields. So this isn't going to be in a consumer market anytime soon. Right now, they're really looking at drug discovery, disease modeling. It's an added value that scientists can basically perform experiments on a little synthetic brain, basically. I mean, that's kind of, where it reminds me of like Frankenstein or something. I mean, it's like, we're going to make this thing from the dead. And I don't know, it's not the dead, but you're starting with a, Petri dish and seeing where it goes. It's pretty awesome. Lab grown biological computer.
Yeah.
First of many.
We've seen it in, a really good example is the great, one of the best game series, Half-Life. You see it in like, there's certain alien tech that essentially, it's just a little capsule and it's got this weird little crustacean in it. And not only does that power the computers, it handles computing power as well. So, I mean,
pretty cool.
The idea that your brain could be in a vat of jelly that can receive and send electrical impulses.
It's like the bad guy in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's like a brain that lives inside of the giant mech. I don't even remember what his name is, but yeah, that's basically it. I mean, that's.
Oh my gosh, dude, I haven't thought about that in years.
Yeah, remember that freaky thing?
Yeah.
Like in kids' cartoons, you're like, oh my god.
Well, and as we get further, you got to think about these things show up in industries first before they become used commonplace. So like gaming, medical, we're going to see this come on. And from the medical side, both of these technologies are only going to deepen and enhance the digital world that you can experience.
Yeah, that's right.
Or gamify the real world to a degree that you're just always in some type of digital experience, even just walking about, right? And that's where I think...
Well, it's pain-free living, cure to cancer stuff.
Right.
I mean, that's...
It can stimulate your hormones. Yeah. It can, again, which that is what... It's kind of like... Not to get way off the topic here, but like in your everyday life, you have an experience of reality that's based on your chemical makeup, your conscious decisions, and sometimes you're not aware that, hey, today I actually am really feeling really tired. My hormone balance is off. I experience
You don't know why, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I experience this as my personal experience, which is like maybe brain fog, or
you had a bad night's
feeling
sleep.
crappy, but I feel angry. I think I'm angry, but I really just haven't eaten.
But you really just woke up after 3 hours of sleep and you had a bad night kind of thing, right?
And so when you're able to start hijacking your natural systems that are supposed to be telling you, hey, you need to get this much sleep, eat this, behave this way, prevent this type of exposure to this or that, you can get over that because you can just say, hey, I know I had a terrible night last night, but I need to turn up my dopamine manufacturing.
Well, that's where you wake up in the morning and your phone, or not even your phone, whatever, your AI in your house just says, good morning. Last night you slept 7 hours and you hit REM sleep at here, and your cortisol levels were at this point, and I think this morning you need to do XYZ. You need to eat an orange and have, this vitamin, and don't drink the coffee, but make sure you have your juice. It's basically just going to tell you what you need. to manage your meat skeleton, right?
Right. Or what mood do you want to be in today?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It'll
already know, right? It'll already know. It's like, you have 3 meetings today, and here's what this is what you need today. Here's your injection of whatever.
What blockers do we need to turn on?
Take this pill, kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe not even pills, because again, if this tech is
it's already inside of you,
based,
it'll turn it automatically, just give you what you need, kind of thing.
Yep.
Pretty cool. We're already near. Well, I'm middle age. You're nearing middle age, so we'll see if this catches us before we age out. But Ray Kurzweil seems to believe we're good. He basically said if you're under 50 now, you're good. So I mean, I think we're gonna have the option.
Yeah.
The question is, I will be, I'll be forever 65, while someone else will be forever 25, right?
Exactly.
So I'll be maybe the old wise one that lives to 500. I don't know.
Right. Well, and it's really going to be amazing to see this play out, because I mean, ultimately this is happening, and so we can think about the dystopian outcomes. Those are easy in my head to think about, and spooky, because we live in a society now where I feel like a lot of the purse strings that pull the strings.
Media thrives on spooky and creepy.
Right.
And
they're either so selfish and greedy that it ends up being not good for humanity, or they're just straight up out for
I think that market is dying, though. People are starting to turn that stuff off because they don't want it anymore. The consumption cycle of bad news all the time, or bad media all the time, it's almost like coming to an end a little bit. Like, I feel like people don't want that anymore. They want their fun TikToks. They want their social life. They want a good time. They don't want to be constantly told about how the world's going to shit, right? It's like, no, I'm tired of that mood. We live that, let's move on. I don't know. It feels like the tide is turning just a little bit. By the way, on that topic, great movie on Apple. It's called Mountainhead. It's really cool.
Okay.
It's about these 4, it's a fiction movie about these 4 kind of tech titans of industry who go to have the bro weekend at, the Mountain Lodge. And it's sort of this future where 2 of them are AI tech CEOs. One of them has this like deep fake model that's out in the world that is causing hysteria because the AI is so good that it's prompting like fake wars that actually create real conflicts. And yes, so he's got this model, and he's like the most valuable man on earth. He's worth like several $100 billion. And then another guy who's kind of worth $50 billion. He's got the AI model that can detect what's real and what's not. And so it's interesting because
they're best friends.
Yeah, well, they're kind of love-hate. The one guy wants to buy out the other guy, and he doesn't want to. It's just a great movie. And then you've got Steve Carell actually plays the older tech titan who's kind of aging out, and he's got cancer, and he may die soon. And so he's trying to figure out a way to like live forever, get his consciousness on the cloud, kind of thing. It's a cool movie, and it hits on a lot of these different philosophical topics we're talking about. So I watched that yesterday, and it makes you think of like the Sam Altman-Frieds and the Elon Musks and all, Mark Zuckerberg, and sort of, you're like, oh yeah, these guys actually influence the world, not the other way around. Like, because they get to the point where there's some of this stuff boiling over, and the president's calling them because he's like, hey, we're worried about your stuff. And they think, at one point, it's a dark comedy. At one point, he's like, let's just shut some power off. Can you do that? And Steve Carell's like, yeah, I could probably do that. We want to brown out. He's like, yeah, let's brown out France. He's like, okay, what if we just knock out 30% of their, it's pretty funny, but it's also very real. You're like, wow, this is actually, we're not too far off from this. So
right.
It's cool. It's a cool movie.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is you have, and I've mentioned it before, one of the interesting technologies is the geospatial stuff, which is something like Pokemon Go. Most players don't know, but their device and them moving around and playing together is slowly building a geospatial model where if you say take a picture and you give it to this AI, it can get you down to the centimeter of where you're located, what the terrain's
pretty cool.
like. Yeah. And so you're combining these harnessing technologies, and also, I mean, personally, I love Grok. I love AI as like a good personal assistant. I would love to get to a point where I have like an Optimus robot assistant, right? Who, kind of like what you were saying, without I would rather do it externally than have it internally. But things from like, let's work on your diet. Here's your routine. Those types of tools I think can really enhance your life if used properly.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to explore the possibilities there. I'm hoping that our brain is enough of a electromagnetic field that we can develop external devices that allow us to experience a lot of this tech
without needing a brain upgrade, right?
I can take it off
Yeah.
and I can put it down
Yeah.
instead of having to, if it's only the
Integrate.
route of surgical,
Yeah.
I won't, I don't
I
think I'll do
don't think I would do that either. You have to be able to unplug still. And that's like those days where you're like, man, I just need to go on a hike. Leave your
Right.
phone at home, you know, wear your analog watch, just get away from texting and emails and like take a break, right? So if you have that in you, you can't take a break. I mean, they're going to say, well, you could turn it off. Well, it's like, can I though? I mean, I would rather, like you're saying, just be able to, not.
Or just like this phone, you can turn it off, but guess what? There's a little trickle of power that's still there doing something
Yeah.
and putting off a signal and giving a GPS location, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
your dings, your Wi-Fi.
That's required by the feds, so that this device, even though it's off, can still transmit
That's
data.
like
that
even
can
if it's in
track it.
airplane mode, right?
Right.
Yeah, even if it's in airplane mode.
And so
You got to turn it off and put it in one of those bags.
and
one of
that's why also
those-
they stopped letting you take the battery out of iPhones.
Yeah.
So smartphones are literally designed. You cannot, it can go on for a couple months. Eventually, it'll die completely.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's designed so that you will be tracked at all times.
Yeah, that's why
on or
they
off.
have those bags. Or you can get backpacks now where when you put your stuff in there, it's completely, I don't know, I can't remember the name of it, but it's,
I know what you're talking about.
yeah,
It's a certain type of
it's
material
blacked
or
out.
box.
Yeah, it's basically
Yeah.
a black box. Yeah,
Yeah, that's some interesting stuff, man.
indeed. Good
Well,
stuff. It was a good conversation.
Anything else you wanted to touch on in relation to
No,
your
I
technology?
think that's pretty much it. You know, I'm interested to see where we get with this stuff. The humanoid robots and the humanoid robots that have partially organic components in their brains. That's pretty cool. And like you said, having one around the house that's not going to kill you in your sleep. That could be good.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Trying to look over my notes real quick, see if there's anything else worth mentioning.
No, I think that summed it up, man.
All right. Well, it's good to get back into routine. I know we kind of joked around like season 2, but we're optimistic we'll get back to doing some episodes. If we have this busy season, I know our production setup, we were feeling really good about our studio setup today. And so I'm excited to kind of tune back in. Glad we're past the election again.
Yeah,
so we
me
can
too.
actually focus on some of the tech and the technology. And, I think we can keep our hopes up about the future. Fundamentally, my both outlook on life and my instincts tell me, trust God. But also, keep your principles.
Well, you have to
decide what the line
stay-
is for you.
Yeah.
And
You got to stay mentally and spiritually and philosophically grounded in something that's not the television and not the phone, right? You got to find your own kind of place to be, your own headspace to be in. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the muck. So,
right. Well, and the best thing you can do in this age, there's a lot of invisible hands that guide reality. They talk about the invisible hand that guides the economy, right? What's good for human nature is instinctual, it's subconscious, and so sometimes history and events are guided by forces we don't understand. And so, but sometimes the invisible hands in your life are tech giants and they're politicians and so it's the best thing to do to ensure your freedom of choice is just to be aware, truly, because when we're aware, we're able to do something about it, or we're able to unplug. And so that's why I think it's
you're able to
important.
make an informed choice.
And make
That's
an
the
informed
key, right?
choice. And so, whether you choose to or you choose not to, that's at least in your hands. Sometimes it's the only power we have in a society where, a lot of humans make decisions for us, or we're forced to be subject to the group's decisions. And so I think it's important for people to be aware of these technologies, even though they can seem a little weird and sci-fi. I'm excited.
But they're
that
not,
we're-
though.
They're just around the corner.
Yeah.
They're just around the
absolutely.
corner. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. Thanks for keeping up with us. We'll see you on the next one.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.